Welcome again to the workshop of Wood Spun Round. This is Doug. It is good to have you with me today. We're working here. You see a piece of, I'm going to call this fogwood, found on ground, FOG, fogwood. I really don't know what it is. It probably came out of one of the trees in the backyard. I've got 3 trees, 2 different poplars, and a silver maple. And every once in a while, one of those trees will drop a branch when we have a bit of a storm. And any of them that have any size at all, I will collect, and I'll keep them right outside the back door of my shop. And so I have them standing on end, let them dry. And this time of year, I use a lot of those for snowmen and for Christmas trees. And every year, I have videos or people asking me for a video on those 2 items. I've already shown a snowman video. I didn't show one this year. May have to yet, but I had a bunch of snowmen, already got them in the shop. I did not have Christmas trees, and I've got one of my shops that didn't want snowmen this year. They wanted Christmas trees, and so I'm getting an order ready to go out. This is the last of this batch. I turned these in batches. I'll tell you more about that here in a minute, but here I'm turning the last of this particular batch, and I think you may have already seen it. If not, you're about to see. It's not right there. You probably already saw it. For some reason, I went in the other room or went upstairs for something, but I slid my wedding band back on my left hand, and I think I may have actually just taken it off and stuck it in my pocket just now. So, I'm catching that. I'm trying to catch that more often. It's not the worst thing in the world. However, I've heard stories. I have seen a finger or 2 where a wedding band got caught either on a tool or on a piece of wood and did some pretty significant damage. I know of some folks who had to help cut rings off of friends of theirs. And people had to give up turning because of it. It can do that kind of damage. So just a good idea. It's a best practice to take a wedding band off. Nope, I just saw it on my finger. I haven't taken it off just yet, but I'm about to. A little later on, you'll see it's gone. But it is there now. I can see the shine underneath my thumb there. Anyway, I've used the roughing gouge, the spindle roughing gouge, and gotten the bark off and gotten this little short piece of log down to a nice round, and I even used it to start the taper of the Christmas tree itself. I've put it away now, and I've pulled out my 1-inch skew, and I'm simply laying out where the whorls of this tree will be. I really got ahead of myself because I wanted to make sure that taper was nice and smooth all the way down. Quite often after the roughing gouge, I've taken my ring off. But after the roughing gouge, I usually have some lumps and bumps, and the skew will take that down to a nice smooth taper. And that's what I'm doing here, and I'll come back and reestablish all those lines. You see I'm cutting through those lines. Did not have them all that deep, but I'm cutting them down. That skew is nice and sharp. Usually the beginning of each batch, I take that skew to my honing stone, my diamond stone, and hone that edge up real nice and sharp so it cuts very, very well. Just showed you those shavings. They look like toothpicks or something, but those are actually curls that are curled up on themselves really tight. You can't pull them apart. Just going back and deepening those lines. And something interesting here, and I wasn't thinking of mentioning it, but I noticed it as I was doing the editing here, that I don't measure those whorls. I let them be uneven, and you can see they're very uneven. Part of that, nature. In nature, these trees do not grow evenly. There's deeper ones and thicker ones. They do grow kind of in this triangular shape. On the farms, on the Christmas tree farms, if you ever watch those guys when they go out and they work on these trees almost every day of the year, and develop that angular design. They cut the ends off of the limbs so that the trees are more angular than what they would be normally. Just kind of reestablishing the bottom of that bottom whorl right there. And taking a parting tool, I'm going to go in and create the trunk. I've done some things where the bases came right up to the bottom whorl, and most people have said the same thing. And my wife said it the other day, and that she really preferred to see some trunk. And so I'm trying to make sure I have even just a little bit of that trunk exposed, regardless of what kind of base. That's another thing that I do. I don't have a set base. There's a number of bases that I use. This is one. I don't know how many I've turned already. I'm close to 30 at this point. Christmas trees I've turned for the season. But I don't know that any of them have been the same, and this one is different from any I've turned this year. So I've just turned that base down a little further, kind of giving myself a line. Where am I? What am I? I'm going to have some kind of a top here, and how deep do I want that? And I just gave myself a line, going in and just turning this lower section of the base down a little further, putting a little curve on it. I'm kind of deciding here what I'm going to do. The top's going to stay pretty much where it is. The base I'm turning down. See, they're just reestablishing that border between the rim and what's going to be the bottom portion of this. Going to make kind of a pot looking thing here, not a flower pot per se, but more of just a planting pot. It'd be a big pot like you would have out on your deck, your patio. Scale matters here, especially if this is going to be a tree. You might imagine it's a living, it's a live tree, not a cut tree that's in this pot. Big pot so that it can be replanted after the Christmas season is over. Nice little OG type of curve with a bit of a square rim. That part at the very bottom is just scrap. I'll part it off of just above that. Let me kind of, while I'm cutting the whorls here, let me just kind of go back to the very beginning. You probably did not see it, but you notice I'm using in the headstock, I've got a steb center. That has an active spring, and the center point sticks out beyond the gripping point. And so when I'm in production mode and I'm turning anywhere from 4 to 8 of these at one time, excuse me, I'm turning 4 to 8 of these at a time. And so in production mode, the whole idea is to get these done basically as quickly as possible. I'm kind of taking my time here because I want you to see what I'm doing. Also, it's time for these tools to all be sharpened. I've gone here to my Doug Thompson 1/2-inch bowl gouge, and it's still pretty sharp, but I can tell it's not as sharp as when I started. Skew is kind of the same way. Excuse me. But time is of the essence here, and sharp tools play a role in that. This step center plays a role too. I do not need to turn this lathe off to take a Christmas tree out or to put a new blank in there. I have my tail center extended just enough so that when I pull it back, there's enough room to put the blank in there. And I can put it against that spring-loaded center in the steb center, and it doesn't start spinning at all. There's nothing to cause it to spin. Then I bring up my live center in the tailstock, and as I begin to extend it, as soon as it starts touching the wood, I make sure we're in good shape before I crank it up, and I let go, and I crank that tail center down, and it pushes that blank back against that steb center so that the gripper teeth can begin to turn it. I've completed my turning. Now I'm going to sand. I'm going to start at 100 grit. Sometimes these pieces of wood will have some crazy things going on in them. Sometimes I get a little over anxious, and that lower edge of that whorl will chip off. And like I said a while ago, speed is of the essence, so I don't always take the most time in turning the whorls. So I may have a little tool mark or a little divot. If I start with 100 grit, it takes that out very easily, very quickly, without being so super aggressive. These are just little decorative pieces, and they are meant to be semi-primitive, and so I don't need them to go all the way back to 60 and come back up with it. 100 grit is a good place for me to start. You notice also I'm working my way down the tree first, and then I'm going to come back up the tree, going the other direction. That way I can get underneath the whorls and get the edges at the same time. So I get the top of the whorl, get everything I can reach on the base, and then I start at the very bottom and work my way back up to the top. And I'll do that with each grit: 100, 150, 240, 320. Didn't show you there, but this is the 150 grit. One of the things that I've noticed, the more of these that I do, the more I can see where it is that I need to sand. Especially when I'm at the 100 grit, I can see the little tool lines that are left. And what I can't see, I can always feel, because I am using my fingers here. I'm not using any kind of a backer pad or anything like that. If I get a little chip out, I can feel that. Get a bad place, I can feel that as well. Up to the 240 grit now, and this is starting to be very smooth. There is dust coming off. You can see that from time to time. The vacuum is running, the dust collector there. You can see that. In fact, once I turn it on with the very first blank in the grouping, I don't turn my vacuum off. I leave it on. And so I've got my face shield on. I've got my hearing protection in. I can't stand the sound of that shop vac. It is so loud. Bit of 320, and we'll be finished up with the sanding. I do once I take these off, and you'll see me preparing to take it off here right after the 320. When I take them off of the lathe, they get one more sanding process. I'll take that stub center out of the headstock spindle, and I'll put in a sanding pad that is in a block that holds it in my chuck. And I'll sand off the very bottom, get it nice and clean, nice and smooth, and I'll touch up the very tip where I have to trim the tip part off. Taking my parting tool here, just parting in just above that rough section. Don't want to go all the way to the very bottom because I don't want to dig into the teeth on my stub center. I'll make a cut or the width and a width and a half, or maybe even two widths of that parting tool. Depends on what base I put on there to get the bottom down pretty close. I'll go down to about 1/8 of an inch is what's left. And then here I've got my little 1/2 inch Skew, my Doug Thompson Skew. It's becoming one of my favorite tools in the entire arsenal. And I'm just working down the very tip of that. Again, don't want to go to the very end because I don't want to get into my live center. But I am working that tip down just as close as I can to being a finished cut. It will still get just a touch of sanding, just to make sure there's no holes in there, no rough areas. Not quite going to go through it. I can go through it. I've gone through a couple of them where once I took it out of this, away from the stub center, that top tip just fell off, which is pretty cool, but that's not my goal here. There you see, it'll just break off that piece, and I break off the little top, and then it's ready for my final sanding. That's what I do for Christmas trees. I'm glad you've been with me today. This is Doug at Wood Spun Round. Until we meet again, I hope you're able to spin them round.